Hello, Wael.
Hey Fadi,
How are you?
good and yourself?
Good, good.
Good to
Thanks
see
for
you in
taking the
this.
time to meet.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity for
Sure.
us to chat.
Yeah, we've been having some long chats lately, and
Yeah,
I thought, yeah, why not make it public? I mean, uh,
yeah, sure.
uh, sure, and probably lots of the topics will resonate with the audience.
I
So,
hope so. I'd love to hear what they have to say. I saw a bunch of people indicate that they would attend or at least indicate interest in this conversation. So it would be cool to hear what people are looking for.
great. So let's start. Wael, you're a seasoned security leader with a nice career in some of the biggest companies in the world, from Cisco to VMware to Amazon, mostly in security. So yeah, tell us more about your journey, and especially the circular part from AUB to GCC to Silicon Valley, then back to GCC, and circular is a big word now in the in the space of AI investments. So yeah, anyway, tell
Ah,
us.
yeah. I see where you're doing.
It's a positive circle in your case.
Mine's a lot simpler. It's a bit of ambition, a bit of love, a bit of family, a bit of adventure. That's kind of what I would say led the moves. Although I would say what I've noticed in retrospect, the biggest moves in my life were never premeditated or engineered. I used to think that I had a lot more control over, the big decisions, but that's not necessarily how things play out. So I grew up in Lebanon and in Beirut, and I finished my studies at AUB. I was not a good student, so let me just preface that. If I give any advice, just take that with a grain of salt. Uh, I did a year and a little bit in electrical engineering, and that was just not my thing. And while I was, trying to figure out what I was going to do next, I realized that hey, I had an early interest in computers, so I figured out that maybe computer science was the path of least resistance for me, so I could still, graduate while still playing music and enjoying myself. But before graduating, I realized that I had a thing for network security, or generally networking and security, both topics. And, we can get to that in a bit. But yeah, I graduated from AUB in computer science and I moved to Abu Dhabi. And the move to Abu Dhabi was kind of natural because my mom had moved here for work for some time. So I moved here and I knew that I wanted to be a network engineer. And yeah, there were no openings, but one prominent systems integrator in Abu Dhabi told me that they could take me on as sort of an intern, for sort of a training, as a trainee. And I said, sure, it was an opportunity, and that led to a job. So a month of training in, there was an opening. They needed to have a resident network engineer uh, to be placed at Abu Dhabi municipality, actually. So it was a terrific opportunity for me. So I did that for about a year and a half, and then I was back in the office. And as you know, working for a systems integrator, you're doing different stuff. You're going to different clients. You're installing network equipment. It could be also security equipment, all sorts of different clients in the public and the private sector. But after 2 years of that, I actually wanted a job where I could own the infrastructure of an enterprise and not be, going to because the thing with systems integrators, you go in, you do a job, and you get out. I wanted to sort of address an infrastructure end to end with all of its problems and challenges. So I joined a luxury retailer in Dubai, and they had offices in the GCC, Shalhoub Group. and that was a role I really enjoyed. So again, I was the network engineer, but in every job I took, I was dabbling with security. So it was a constant interest of mine. Um, I'll talk about that later. But anyway, 2 years at Shalhoub, and then I moved to Canada, and I worked at a company that ran a service very much like WebEx. So it was real time collaboration. We had about 40 data centers worldwide. So that company was my first opportunity doing, production grade, basically production networking. It wasn't enterprise or corporate networking. It was production. That it was all real time, all latency sensitive, and that's where I really cut my teeth on, large scale production grade networks. And then we were acquired as well, so that comes with a bunch of learning too. And then towards the end of my stay there, I got an offer from Cisco, so that kind of led to my move to the San Francisco Bay Area. And as a network engineer, that was a dream come true. To work for Cisco, and not anywhere. It was at the global headquarters. So, but I joined the WebEx group, which at the time was part of, and still is part of Cisco. So as you know, WebEx used to be a company of its own, and then Cisco acquired WebEx. Yeah. So yeah, I moved there, but WebEx was much larger than the company I used to work for. So whereas in Canada, I was responsible for the entire global network. WebEx, I was the lead for global load balancing. So I own global load balancing for WebEx across the world. So it was an amazing experience. And at one point, I started to pivot into not non-strict network engineering projects. And then eventually there was a team that was spun up to develop the next generation version of WebEx that was going to be cloud native.
Mhm.
And that was a team doing like pure DevOps, which was completely new back at the time, especially for Cisco. And we were deploying outside of Cisco data centers, which was also a first. So we were deploying in AWS, a company called Rackspace. And then Cisco actually had $1 billion project to develop cloud networking infrastructure as well. But eventually they dropped that because it didn't make sense for them to go against the established hyperscalers like AWS and Azure and whatnot. So it was in that role that I switched to doing security. And and then after 5 years at Cisco, I realized that I'd worked mostly for large companies, and I wanted to get a taste of what it would be to work at a startup. Uh, so I joined a company in Palo Alto called Medallia, which is still around, and Medallia went public, I believe. And yeah, that was my first taste of a pure startup. It was a little surreal. A lot of the stuff you read about startups are true. So, um, yeah, and yeah, I only lasted a year at Medallia. It wasn't necessarily the best fit, but I made some lifelong friends there. I learned a lot about startups as well about myself. And then I joined a small but public company in fintech called Lending Club. They were in San Francisco, so I was working in the city for about a year. Um, and after that, I went back to South Bay, which is, the Santa Clara, Mountain View area, because it was closer to home. So I moved to VMware. It was actually an interesting story. I joined a company called Avelo Cloud, but I was the last hire because we were acquired by VMware probably just a few weeks after. So, uh, but the cool thing is VMware they let us operate autonomously to a certain extent. So we were still sort of our own business unit. So I was the security lead, and so I kind of owned security for VeloCloud end to end. of course, in coordination with the central VMware security teams.
Mhm.
But since I had worked at Cisco, I kind of knew how large companies operate, so I knew what teams to interface with. And so even though we were a business unit, it meant we didn't have to rebuild everything from scratch, but there was a lot of stuff we did differently. So I had to kind of bridge between, our processes and what VMware needed us to do.
Quite a
Uh,
responsibility.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And then I did another shift within VMware. I wanted to, so up to that point, I was working either as a network engineer or a security engineer, and I wanted to try my hand at coding or software engineering. So VMware had a really nice program to encourage internal mobility. So I joined as a security software engineer. There was a team that built uh, security tools and services for use within VMware. So those could be things that, I don't know, detect internal risks, map out the network internally, gather all sorts of telemetry, or it could be tools to streamline compliance. So they could go and interface with all sorts of systems and gather compliance data and upload them to auditor systems to make, compliance easier. Because normally all of that work is done manually. So I worked on a couple of those projects to get a hang of what a formal software engineering practice looks like. So that was pretty cool. And then after that, I joined Amazon as a security engineer within the payment security unit. So we owned security for all sorts of uh, businesses that involve money moving around for Amazon. So
And are you still
uh,
coding at Amazon or not really?
not, no, I mean, you could obviously you could do whatever you needed to get your job done. There was
Mhm.
nothing in your way there. So my last project, I built uh, I built something using sorry, I built a tool that was using Gen AI, but I wrote code for it. So
I think we lost you, I would say, due to a cable issue. Okay, just waiting for Wael to come back.
hey, Fadi,
Yeah, you're back.
yeah, sorry about that.
No
Um,
problem.
yes. So yeah, you were asking if I needed to code.
Yeah, at Amazon that
Yeah,
you said.
yeah. I mean, it wasn't necessarily something you did on an everyday basis, but you needed to be at least code conversant because the role had a heavy emphasis on application security. So you were threat modeling existing and new applications and scrutinizing, uh, deployments and stuff like that. So obviously, you needed to understand what it was that was being deployed and how. I mean, depending on the consultation you had, it could be
Mhm.
for something new, it could be for something in development, and you were being consulted on how something was being done. If you need to go and refer back to existing standards, you need to kind of understand if what was being done was correct or not. Uh, yeah, but obviously, being able to code would give you an advantage. I would say
Definitely.
in almost any role. Um, and and then
Yeah, from
I
Amazon
moved.
back to the region.
Yes, so that was purely for family reasons.
Mhm.
My family's in the region, and we have three kids, and we just wanted to be closer to them. We were very blessed in our life there, and so but the one thing we were missing is family, and to some that's basically everything. So that's what we decided to do.
I
Yeah,
can't agree more.
yeah,
And yeah, security, it's a hot topic, but at the same time, many people just don't want to venture into this space. So, what would you recommend? So this space to people who love the tech world, are intrigued, but by some of the exciting stories about hacks, and although we all know that it involves a big chunk of tedious work, regular work. It's not always chasing hackers. So would you recommend it to someone who doesn't really find themselves in coding, and but still want to stay in the tech world? I mean, who should go into cybersecurity?
yeah. Hold on, I think I'm out of focus again. Yeah, no, am I
No, you're
better?
good. You're
Okay.
good.
Yeah. Um, Look, I don't think security is unique in terms of whether you should recommend it to someone or not. Just like saying, should you go into X or Y or Z? I think it comes down to your own interests or whatnot. I think where I agree, there's a bit of hype or mystique around it because of, like you said, there's this thing about uh, protecting against hacks but security now means it's a very broad field now. It's not about breaking, only breaking. In fact, that one of the reasons why I didn't get into security early in my career is because back in the day, it was mostly around breaking stuff, finding vulnerabilities, finding flaws. And for me, on a personal level, that just wasn't enough to sustain my interest because ultimately, you're basically looking at mistakes other people made and trying to exploit them, which is very interesting. Don't get me wrong, and it's a difficult discipline, especially if you talk about things like reverse engineering. And for me personally, I just realized this is going to take a lot of work that for me wasn't going to be that rewarding. So I chose to focus on networking. Okay, that's me. However, but in 2010, once sort of virtual infrastructure started to take off, and you could, in 5 minutes turn up the equivalent of a whole data center using code, that got me thinking that, wow, you can now start to think about, building security defensively in interesting ways. And so if someone should pursue security, it depends on your interest. It's a very interesting field. It intersects a whole bunch of other fields because security is impacted by development, by supply chain, by politics, by hacktivism, by so it's a very interesting field. It requires you to think in a very fluid way. But it's 2025, and now everyone's wondering what their job is going to look like. So I don't know answering that question 10 years ago or 5 years ago is going to be very different now. But I still think it's going to have its own space in a sense that, I think we're all just going to be dealing with data and processes, but using a different lens. So if you're a software engineer, you're concerned with, how the systems interact with each other to produce a certain, output or result, right? You're mostly focused on that. And I think a security person is, maybe using the same tooling, but focusing on a different aspect of that. So, um, but yeah, look, whether it's something that's good for you to pursue or not, it really has to do with where your interests lie. If it's something that you find yourself spending a lot of time on effortlessly and you're enjoying where that is taking you, that's probably a good sign. If you, a lot of people approach it from the standpoint of, oh, I read that this pays well and it sounds interesting, so is this a good thing for me? I'm probably going to say no
And that's in
because,
high demand. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think it applies even, I mean, at one point, same thing with networking. A lot of people were getting into computer networking for that reason. Oh, it pays, six figures and whatnot. And it just, it does.
Wael, did we lose you? For once, it's not Lebanon to blame.
Someone or something wants me to put my network engineer hat and figure out what's going on. Um, yes, so yeah, because if you're in it for, for money or other some reason like that, the chances are you're not going to be great at it. It's very hard. And if if the current wave with AI and AI hype is teaching us anything, is that if you're mediocre or you're in it for the wrong reasons, you're going to have a tough time. So find something that sustains your interest and your curiosity. But I don't know what this profession would look like. And if anyone tells you they know, I think they're lying or they're well intentioned, but they're ignorant. I don't think anyone knows where things are going. So, uh,
Yeah.
but look, I
With
will say,
AI.
yeah, I will say this. I think what we're seeing now is, reintroducing a new threat surface, and it's going to take us some time to understand how to deal with it. So this, might inject a lot of fresh energy into the discipline. Although some think that, hey, we'll just make agents do all the security work and we'll call it a day, but it's not as simple as that because the tricky thing now with Gen AI is it breaks a lot of well-established security paradigms that we had sort of kind of polished over the last few decades, and now we just basically completely threw out. So the very simple thing, which I'm sure you read about all the time, is prompt injection. But that's
Uh,
just because you're not separating control and data flows. Something we like control and data plane separation is something we've kind of really pushed for over the last few decades. This is sort of a principle you don't violate. And with LLMs, that's pretty much how they work. To do anything useful, they have to take untrusted input and execute it faithfully. And yeah, you can have guardrails but I mean, you see it, right? A new model comes out and the next day the system prompt is leaked. And it's the ongoing cat and mouse game we've always known, but now it's at a much more rapid scale. So
Yeah, I want to get into the AI impact on security, but just wanted to ask you about, one last bit about security by design. So when you say
yeah,
security by design, what would this mean for individuals, for teams, for processes? Um, Walk us through, this concept in practical terms. How would you put it into practice? Let's say if we're building a product.
yeah. So, one thing, the way I think about security is it's part of software quality, full stop. If your system passes every test, but it behaves insecurely, it's not a quality product. Okay, whether it's a standalone software product or if it's a SaaS service or be that as it may, right? So security by design essentially means that you start asking security questions at the moment of product conception, even before you lay down a single line of code, not after the first prototype ships. So you start very early. It's also intentional and proactive. It's not reactive and ad hoc. So those are, crucial properties of security by design. So most companies with mature programs, and those tend to be large companies, they'll use some variant of something called the SDL, stands for the Security Development Lifecycle or Secure Development Lifecycle. Typically, SDLC stands for the software development, right? But the SDL is a term coined by Microsoft. They're one of the first that, wrote a book on threat modeling. But the SDL typically overlays, the normal SDLC, and the typical flow will have a number of repetitive core activities. And there's again variants on these, but they typically consist of, first of all, something called threat modeling, something you do early on while your design is fluid, and you try to think about the ways that your system is going to face threats, like based on how you're designing it conceptually. What do those threats look like? And obviously, at that stage, you're still talking very high level architecture, so you can map these types of threats. So at that point, you're not talking about, the threat of using a particular library, right? Because you haven't written any software yet. But for example, you can think about the threat that, hey, those are my threat actors. We're going to have, we're building this type of system. It's going to have these types of users. These are the sorts of threat actors that could be interested in attacking the system, and, we're thinking of storing, certain data of this type. Then these are the types of threats that come along with that. So you're having these sorts of very early discussions. Um, then as you start coding, you still threat model. You consider the specific interfaces that you're exposing and how you're handling the data and all of that stuff. The other phase would be static analysis, which allows you to catch issues in code. So if you think about the way you're shipping software or your services as some sort of a pipeline, the whole saying of shift left, although I hate that term now, it's completely overused. But think of it that way. You're basically starting, or if you start left to right, then you're on the left. And if you imagine it to be right to left, then you're starting on the right. Um, and then after static analysis, where you're pouring through your static code for issues, you have dynamic analysis to validate your runtime behavior. So once you deploy this thing, how's it actually deploying live? Are you exposing any unnecessary services? What does your, your dynamic threat surface look like? That would be that phase. And finally, you want to deploy securely to ensure that the service runs safely in production. Of course, you could add more phases like, deploy securely and monitor and respond. Okay, those are other phases that you could have as a pillar. You could include training your staff on security as again part of the SDL. But to me, like those four things that I mentioned, threat modeling, static analysis, dynamic analysis, and secure deployment, those are sort of the foundational elements if you wanted to start small. So obviously your runtime security, meaning once you're up and running, like how do you then maintain a secure state? Because if you deploy securely, but then you don't have a way to transition from one safe state to another, then you know what? Two deployments down the line, your threat surface will look very different. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
And yeah, I mean, we can go and go on the security side of things, and it's something that I'm excited about because maybe I always think that we're not doing enough. But anyway, I mean, at Supportful, working on a training for focused on security because
Yes.
I do believe in its importance, and especially with AI. And, we're gonna talk about this in a few minutes. Just from your career working at big tech, what are one or two things that are not widely adopted in smaller businesses and startups, but that should be and could be adopted with the few resources and with the little resources that these companies have? I don't know, maybe one thing or two, if you can think of them, in terms of processes, maybe attitude.
Um, so one thing about big companies is they can afford to make quote unquote wasteful bets because they have deep pockets that let you explore ideas that may look pointless or uneventful until one of them unexpectedly becomes foundational or becomes important to, the next project then becomes big. So they recognize the value in sort of exploring things that may not be very obvious. And like I said, they have deep pockets, but deep pockets can also lead to just wasteful spending. So it's not necessarily a rule. So the takeaway I would say for a small company is to sometimes allow yourself to explore those ideas that may not necessarily look like immediate priorities, of course, within what you can afford, time-wise and money-wise. But don't just be overly tactical. So, and I think that comes from, and it's understandable. When you're a startup, you don't really have a lot of time or energy or money to waste. So you're super tactical, very execution driven. But at some point, you need to find, I don't want to say a balance necessarily, just recognize those opportunities when they arise and see what you can tolerate in terms of experimentation. So I would say generally, like, try to have an experimentation driven culture where appropriate. Uh, and
And
then, yeah,
yeah, please,
yeah, yeah.
please.
Yeah, that's it. I thought you were going to say something.
I just wanted to say that, to your point, with AI now, it's easier and easier to experiment. So, from vibe coding and prototyping up to even, implementing some initiatives with the use of AI, obviously pre-production level, just to make sure that this is to validate an idea or not. And which brings us to the question that we cannot avoid now. How would you describe your relationship with AI? Not your personal one, but your professional one.
Uh, Not my personal. No, I would say so. It's threefold. And one angle is I'm a consumer of AI on a personal and a professional level.
Mm.
Um, I'm I'm trying to be a contributor, so I'm trying to conceptualize a framework for securing AI.
Wow.
It's actually very similar to the SDL, but it's kind of a secure AI lifecycle.
Is
Nothing
this part of
groundbreaking, but I'm just sorry.
is this part of a collective effort, or it's just an individual
No,
effort?
it's an individual effort of mine. Yeah, and
Interesting.
it follows it. So I'll just tell you, 2 years ago, so 2023, I spoke at a conference in Washington, D.C. It's called Threat Modeling Conference. And so back in 2023, not a lot of people were talking about threat modeling using Gen AI. So I actually spoke and shared my own findings from experimenting with ChatGPT at the time for threat modeling. And and the way I kind of got it to give me some useful results was first, see, when you're trying to model the threats of a system, the first step is actually understanding the system. So you have to understand the underlying components, right? Otherwise, how are you going to speak about the threats, right? Uh, and I found that by prompting ChatGPT first to decompose the system, I could then have it sort of quote unquote reason about the threats. And I got much better results than just saying, hey, go and try to threat model this. It made the threat modeling output a lot more predictable and deterministic. And yeah, and I shared my results, and funny enough, a lot of the issues back then are still the same now in a sense that it can hallucinate. You still have to scrutinize what you're getting, but it could get you, if it can get you to 60 or 70% very quickly, that's a huge win because then as a security engineer, you're focusing on the more interesting stuff that is more time consuming. Um, so that's kind of, my other area is to try to contribute in that space. Um, I do have a newsletter, which I'm embarrassingly late on maintaining. I have to get back to that, but with the move and it's been a rough year. No excuses, that's on me. But a number of the posts were around. I had started to talk early around some of the challenges that Gen AI was going to introduce. You know, it was going to suffer from some classic, existing security issues, but then it was going to introduce a new set of issues as well. So these are the sorts of things I try to talk about. And finally, I'm also a curious observer, like everyone else, watching what's going on, and with my thoughts and feelings swinging from, mildly annoyed to, genuinely concerned, depending on the context. Hype is, industry hype is something that's not new, but whenever there's a lot of synchronized messaging telling people all to do the same thing, that's kind of
Yeah.
thought provoking. So, my biggest concern is about the demoralizing effect it can have on people thinking that, hey, if this thing's going to be better than me, then what's the use of learning anything, you know? And I think nothing can be further from the truth. That should not be the case. Those are tools. They can empower you, or they could lead you astray. Ultimately, it comes down to how you use them. At least in their current generation. But I don't think the way is to kind of start thinking that we're all going to be useless and this thing is actually smarter than us. In fact, Ilya Sutskever yesterday, I think, in a talk was pointing out like he sees this discrepancy, which something I've personally also noted. There's a big discrepancy between these benchmarks that the model providers keep citing. Every time a new model is there, it's crushing all of the benchmarks. But then if you go and use that thing, and if you're using it, say, to code, you notice that if it hits a bug, it starts oscillating between two bugs and it can never get out if you ask it to troubleshoot. And sometimes you like you'll read the code and you say, okay, this fix is very simple, and it will just try to rewrite the whole thing. And so that's one issue, and the other is it's still very poor at generalizing compared to humans, even on relatively simple stuff. It's not good at generalizing at all.
What do you
So
mean by generalizing?
um, it can be far more competent in very specific areas
Right.
of expertise. But if you ask it to generalize a concept, it does very, very poorly. And that's largely because it's still driven by just training data. It's not really reasoning. Even though it may sound like it, it's just very, very, very good at predicting what you
The
need
next.
to sort of, yeah, yeah. And it's still extremely useful. It's just, you know, we it's a very nuanced thing, but what worries me is people start to anthropomorphize this thing. They say it's reasoning, it's thinking, it's this, it's that. And, I don't think that helps advance AI, but on the contrary, I don't know. Yeah.
The thing is with these doomers, or it has come from people who partly have made this thing happen. So this is why it's getting hype. But anyway, I think specifically the security aspect of things will be more needed with the advent of AI, because AI will be doing a larger part of the work. So we need to, and obviously not in the best way. So we need to compensate in terms of risk mitigation and all the security practices. So I think it will create opportunities more than it will destroy jobs. Definitely, jobs will shift. There will be disruption, but eventually, everything is gonna grow, and people will have to adapt, like every major revolution we went into. So, uh, on the education front, and you spoke about learning. I mean, you have 14 certifications, from various security stuff to architecture to AI, maybe one or two on the PT level too. So, but this is outside of work. So, do you think this is the new form of education?
Look, I think continuous learning absolutely matters. Certifications can help, but their golden era, at least in Silicon Valley, is long gone. I mean, in fact, in some industries there, if you have too many, it's looked at suspiciously.
Mm.
Okay, now, when I was in the Middle East, certifications were, really important. And look, they're a tool, right? So when you're early in your career, they can accelerate your breadth. I used to use them as a tool to gather some knowledge quickly about a field that maybe I wasn't necessarily spending a lot of time in. So having
Mm.
sort of an exam to get to would kind of push me to try to learn some things quickly. Of course, even if I passed, I never thought of myself as an expert in that, right? Because you need to practice. But at least I knew enough to be dangerous sometimes. But it would also help me in my conversations with the different teams I would have. But I would say, based on your experience level, they just have diminishing returns. The more experienced you are, you already have the intuition and the context that, exams cannot really teach you. And for the most part, a lot of these programs are there to sort of train the next wave of engineers in the technology that the certification provider is providing. Now, of course, you have vendor-based certifications and you have sort of vendor agnostic certifications. So, for example, NVIDIA has a line of certifications, AWS has them. And ultimately, if you're AWS certified, what are you going to develop your solutions in? It's going to be in AWS, not in Azure. But I
Right.
will say that some are better than others at teaching you technology. And I will give Cisco as an example because in the early days, if you acquired the Cisco certification, it meant that you were generally going to be a good network engineer because it had a lot of foundational stuff. Yes, it would
Mm.
teach you Cisco iOS specifics, but the base of networking was very, very solid. And say if you got the Cisco CCIE at the time, that was the highest level, you were pretty much sort of really, you had to be really good at actual networking. But for example, the Microsoft certifications, the MCSE back in the day, they weren't that good at anything because a lot of that stuff was point and click. And so I would say, you need to gauge what you're getting out of it. Does it help in your job or not? Maybe you're trying to satisfy your own curiosity, which is also okay. Although nowadays, I mean, there's a ton of information. You don't really need that stuff. So I would say just if it helps motivate you to learn a topic, then, by all means. Uh, and some of the exams are not that expensive these days anymore. They used to be
Yeah.
expensive back in the day. Yeah. So they're a tool. I would say they're a tool, but yes, absolutely. You need to be learning continuously, and the tools to learn are changing. I mean, you could create your own learning program with Gen AI if you wanted to. At least outline some. I mean, I studied for the NVIDIA certification. I had 24 hours because I was attending GTC in San Jose, and they
Uh-huh.
were offering the certification for free for attendees. But the catch was you had to take it during the conference. And there was one spot to take the exam left. It was the next day. And I said, okay, let me craft a learning program. I had like,
Okay.
I said, I have 8 hours, and dude, I passed very comfortably. I finished ahead of time. And now granted, look, you do enough of these things, and you kind of you read the question and you kind of know. So but it worked. The program I crafted was absolutely very helpful. So I took the outline of the NVIDIA exam, which is public, so I didn't have access to any proprietary information. It's just what they make public about the exam. And I created a program over 8 hours. And I said, hey, I want questions. I need multiple choice stuff to reinforce those concepts. And there you go. I didn't have to pay for
So
anything. So
exactly, and this is what we want to hear. What's a piece of advice to software engineers on dealing with AI, and especially for learning? This was a great example, but in general, how should they deal with AI to make sure they are still learning? They're not going the easy route.
I think I think AI will strip away the pointless ceremony that has accumulated around modern software development, and it will refocus the discipline on what actually matters. Right? So there's a lot of ceremonial stuff, even not just in software engineering, but all sorts of other adjacent disciplines. And then because AI can help almost eliminate a lot of the rote work, right? So if the rote work is done, then you're going to be left with the really hard problems, not the easy ones. Okay. So when, when they say, oh, it's going to replace software, like again, if you try to go and build anything useful, you're going to see that, yes, it can absolutely, handle 90% of the silly stuff. Okay. That anyone competent can do by themselves, but it just accelerates your ability to get that done. And then you're going to be left with the harder stuff. Okay. So I think the idea that we can abandon, deep understanding and surrender control to LLMs isn't right. As code gets generated faster, we'll need people who can go deeper, not shallower, in order to design, operate, and secure these systems. And when it does mean that when things break, they're going to be orders of magnitude more complicated than the systems we have now. So the people who will be software engineers have to have very, very strong sort of grounding in systems architecture, systems design, all of these things that were not necessarily areas of interest because people were maybe too much in the weeds of code, of just like the sort of syntactical stuff. So you're going to need to very quickly get past the syntax part and start thinking about issues of scaling, protocols, architectures, these types of things, which normally would take a long time to get to. But maybe now, if you can rely on Gen AI to generate some things that would have taken you a longer time to do that, but now you have to think about all these other aspects that you didn't necessarily have
Mhm.
time for. So but I like, I don't know because the problem is Gen AI doesn't generate perfect code, and you still need people who can read code, secure it. And I know some people think they can secure Gen AI code using Gen AI, but that's still a subject of kind of ongoing debate. One thing I wanted to mention earlier, that the tricky part about the AI discussion, there's a very high degree of polarization. Okay, you
Mhm.
have on the one hand people that, if you dare criticize it, they'll call you, oh, you're out of touch, you're obsolete, you're hating on it, blah, blah, blah. And on the other hand, you have people that say, hey, this is completely useless, right? And I think the
Or
truth is,
dangerous.
or dangerous. And I wouldn't dismiss, yeah, exactly. And I think it is dangerous, but not necessarily for the ways they keep talking about. Like, it is having real effects on, jobs. I think it's going to cause serious disruption. Like, those are immediate issues that we have. The power consumption is absolutely insane,
Going.
and and there are, I mean, sometimes it's there for problems that don't necessarily exist, but no one's questioning any of that. So I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. Yes, we definitely found something very interesting here, but I think there's exaggerations on both sides of the spectrum, and that's where, and most people are kind of caught in the middle. Um,
Yeah. Well, before asking you the last question, just thought
yeah.
that Ahmad dropped a question in the chat. But I think we answered it. So I'd like to hear more about the impact of AI on cybersecurity engineers and their future. It seems that many are losing their jobs because AI can now do what they do. So I think we touched on this point. Unless you want to add something.
I would say saying they're losing their jobs because AI is doing it. I think that's fake news. That's that absolutely is fake news. I don't know anyone that. Obviously, I'm answering very anecdotally here, but many people will tell you that. Um, Listen, job losses happen for many different reasons. Right now, they're primarily happening because of overhiring during COVID, because companies, took on debt they didn't need to. Now, granted, there's a lot of fear. I mean, also just the macroeconomics are not that great right now. If you remember, forget AI. I mean, since 2010, every company I've been at in the Bay Area has had layoffs. There was no AI, and we would have a phenomenal quarter, the stock's up, and then layoffs happen right after. There was no
Amazing.
AI. There was no
Yeah.
AI, uh, so the answer is no, that's not happening, at least not yet. But what will happen to the profession? I think every profession is going to have the sort of the boring, the routine, the rote bits done using some AI enabled tooling, whether it's agentic or whatever you want to call it. If you're using agents that do security, or you have agents that do code quality, or agents that, review your architecture, right? All of these are just really good tools, but you're going to need to know what it is that you're doing. And I sense that myself when I'm using these tools. I know what I'm doing, and so I can run very, very fast. But I'm always observing that, oh my God, this thing can go catastrophically off the rails. And if I didn't know what I was doing, someone, with less knowledge would end up in a bad place. So it's if you know your stuff, it's gonna amplify that work, and if you don't, it's gonna amplify your mistakes. So yeah, that would be my answer.
Okay. And yeah, one last question that I usually ask all of our guests. So, in terms of keeping up with knowledge, staying updated with the latest, any specific routine, that you adopt or reflexes? What are your main go-to resources?
Um, in the past, it used to be that there would be one website or you have your bookmarks and stuff like
Yeah.
that. And yeah, I mean, you could still have sites that you go to, but right now I'm finding it a lot more useful to have sort of a core group of people that that post about areas you're interested in. Because generating news articles or blogs with AI is very easy now. So separating signal from noise now is key. And so that's why if you follow a group of people that you trust you know, uh, are going to actually be writing, who can stand behind what they're writing, and whose opinions you generally respect, that could be a good way. And they could be, by the way, on different media. They could be on YouTube. There's a number of good security people who post regularly on YouTube. They have channels there. Uh, there's a guy called Dave Bombal. He interviews a lot of security folks. He has a nice YouTube channel. Um, and there's some people who are into reverse engineering. You would find them there. But then there's people on LinkedIn you may be connected to professionally. Now, yes, LinkedIn gets a lot of flack because unfortunately, yes, it's becoming a little annoying. But I mean, the people that post good stuff, they tend to stick to that quality. And, you could just follow them and tune everyone out. You can find sometimes good stuff on X, and sometimes it could be hacker news. So, as long as you have that core group, I guess that you're following, that, any of the above will work. There's no set rule in my opinion. And the tools change, sometimes some people used to say that they used to love Twitter for information security. Some people now complain that, oh, it's not the same. So, you just evolve, and you kind of will figure it out. And it's just about but beyond the tools, be clear on why you're learning something. And then once you do, pursue that consistently with persistence, and shield yourself from noise. Don't just chase what everyone else is reading or watching. That'll make you just boring. Seek variety, originality, and depth. That's where real progress comes from.
Great. Well, it was an interesting conversation as usual. It was good to make it
My
public.
pleasure, Fadi.
And now you have some accountability, in terms of your newsletter. So,
Yes, actually, there's one more thing. So I had a sort of a challenge always at home. I come across really interesting things on YouTube, which I would want to share with my kids. And I would make a mental note, I get home and we watch the video, and then we
yeah.
have a lively discussion after. But the challenge always was that, now my kids don't have phones, and I don't believe in sort of unrestricted screen time. So I would rather they do a lot of, reading, writing, playing music, playing sports, that kind of stuff. And of course, screens have their place. Both are very screen literate, one codes and the other. So you know what I mean? So we're not Luddites in that sense, but I thought to myself, wouldn't it be great if there was just this app that you could log into and just watch the videos that I had curated for them, so we could then watch,
Mm.
and I don't want them to fall into the rabbit hole of watch next and suggested and the comments section and the sidebar and all of these disasters. So I am developing a tool that does just that. And I have a bunch of parents that are waitlisted to try out the POC. And it's
I will
called,
join your waitlist.
yeah, it's called curate.video.
Oh, it's already online?
Yeah. Well, that's the waitlist. Yeah, it's like a landing page to here. Yeah.
Curate that video.
Yeah. So In a way, I'm
Okay.
just scratching my own itch, as they say. So we're using it at home, and eventually, I mean, most parents that I shared this with, they kind of got the idea. They got it. I didn't have to explain what I'm trying to do. They said, yes, we get it. Because, the problem today, you can lock down the device, but then there's no tool that they could just watch what you want them to watch. And, I looked at the terms of service of YouTube Kids, for example, and they
Yeah,
reserve the right to keep the viewing habits of the child, and that's just one aspect of it. In addition to the fact, the problem with all of these platforms is they train kids to be good doom scrollers, right? It's never
yeah,
ending, and that's absolutely what you don't want for a child that's trying to develop self-control and discipline. I mean, even adults struggle with this, right? So
sure.
that's it. I'm basically taking the viewer experience 20 years back with
Well,
no noise, no distraction.
I've
So,
just signed up to join the wait list,
okay,
so
fantastic.
I'll be looking forward to receiving this too.
Yes. So that's
Well,
uh,
thank you.
that's yeah,
It was
yeah.
a real pleasure, and
Same here, Fadi.
I hope we made some good and we discussed some interesting topics for people to leave with some takeaways. And
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely. Maybe based on your audience, we'll do a follow-up.
sure, we will. Thank you.
All right, Fadi.
Thanks
Thank
a
you.
lot.
Have a great
Bye.
one. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.